Good morning and welcome to another edition of Sharpe Takes. This morning I'm delighted to have as my guest Sheila Soule from the Addison Northwest School District, that'd be the Vergennes area school district. She's been the superintendent since 2018. She's a native of Randolph, many generations I'm told, and is a veteran educator in Vermont with over 3 decades of experience. She was a director of curriculum at the Harwood Unified Union School District prior to coming to Vergennes and has served as a principal, classroom teacher, and educational consultant for the former Vermont Institutes during her career. A graduate of Johnson State College, she received her Master's of Education from the University of Vermont. She's also a graduate of the Waddington Leadership Program through the Center for Creative Leadership. She was the founder and past president of the Vermont Curriculum Leaders Association. Currently, Soule serves as co-president of the Champlain Valley Superintendents Association and is a trustee of the Vermont Superintendents Association. So welcome, Sheila. It's delightful to have you in the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So it's post introduction of the governor's education proposal. I think we could take a whole lot of time talking about that proposal. I would rather stay with the theme of where are we now, where do we want to be, how do we get there, and how do we pay for it. So where are we at in Vergennes?
Yeah, so Vergennes is on the other side of a pretty steep decline in student enrollment. So from here out, our numbers stabilize, but we have lost a lot of students in the last decade and a half, which has impact on our per pupil cost, of course. Trying to sustain the same programs for fewer kids is very expensive. Right now, we have about 50 to 60 students per class, and that will stay that way for a while. There's a few outliers. We've got a class of 40 in there somewhere and maybe a class of 70, but for the most part, we're between 50 and 60. So that's pretty small class size. So I'd say that has hit us the hardest, in terms of the financial implications of losing the FTE that correspond with that. As you know, we explored additional merger with Mount Abe a few years back, and after 18 months decided that was a no-go for the two communities, and so that option sort of came and went, and now we're sort of waiting to see what might come out of the legislative session this year that could rescue us, but we don't really have a lot of other options. We did repurpose, then close the Addison Central School. So one of our elementary schools has already consolidated, and those students now go to Vergennes Elementary School. And that's about all the in-district consolidation we can really do. Those Ferrisburg students won't fit into the Vergennes Elementary School the way it is now. And so we're right about at holding in terms of the moves we can make.
So at the legislative breakfast last week, I think it was your board chair said that things were looking pretty good in terms of tax rate. A lot, of course, depends on actions of the legislature. How did you manage to keep taxes low or maybe even cut taxes in some communities?
Yeah, this year we will see a tax decrease for our all 5 towns if the yield holds. The yield was higher than expected, so that was already an advantage coming out of the gate. We had $800,000 in surplus that we could apply to the budget. And we also did our budgeting a little bit differently this year. We based it on our FY24 actual spending versus our FY25 budgeted numbers. So in the areas where we didn't, for salaries and benefits, we already knew those amounts. But for the other areas, we budgeted based off slight increases to what we spent in FY24. And so that reduced each line, within the budget. And we were able to cut spending. So we're at only 1.48% increase in terms of our expenditures.
Wow.
And then with the 800 in surplus applied, that's kind of a short-term fix, but it's going to get us through this year. So we expect about a 9% decrease on average to our taxes if the yield holds.
So were you able to do that without, how many staff positions did you have to cut, or
None.
programs that you had to cut?
We did not cut any staff. We did not cut any programs.
Wow.
So we're in good shape this year. And that has sort of historically been true for our budgets. We'll see, a real pain point, and then it kind of levels off a little bit, and then, sort
Yeah.
of like stair stepping. And again, with the surplus that we have to apply, that's taking a lot of the pressure off, and we won't have that likely next year.
Yeah, that's always a challenge, using one-time money.
It
The
is.
legislature used $70 million of one-time money, and
Yeah.
there's still a question
Yes.
how that's going to get taken care of.
Yeah.
The governor, of course, which he hammered on during the election cycle to keep taxes low, he was willing to use $250 million worth of one-time money. It's hard to imagine what kind of situation we'd be in now if we had to pay a $250 million credit card debt
100%. Yeah.
and run our schools.
Yeah, I agree.
It's remarkable, though, that not just Addison Northwest, but this district too, Mount Abe district, and other districts in the state have responded by being able to keep their budgets low and deliver quality programs for students. So as Steph Yu from the Public Assets Institute pointed out last week on this show, that our educational spending over decades has been 1% over inflation for a long period of time. And so we're not really overspending, and we really haven't busted the budget, so to speak, even though for 1 year we had a terrible tax increase.
Yeah, I definitely don't think we're overspending. I mean, I'll probably speak to this more than once during our time together, but we have done a program of studies analysis to compare our course offerings to other high school courses. Offerings in other districts, and we really have the bare bones minimum for our students. Our teachers and our teachers care a great deal for our students. We're doing a wonderful job with our students, and there's not the depth of course offerings that I see for high school students in other places. So, and to add those, we wouldn't have enough students to really populate those courses. So, we're not in a position where we can add. We're just in a position where we're going to hopefully try to hang on to what we have.
So that's a beautiful segue in terms of like, where do we want to go? You want to be able to offer some of those programs. How do we get there?
Yeah, I think we are exercising as much creativity as we can in providing students access. We already have, of course, high school choice for students in Vermont with limitations, but there is high school choice. And then within our county, between Mount Abe and Virgins, where we have a course-based school choice program going into effect next year, where students can take 1 or 2 courses at the opposite high school. If they don't want to exercise that full choice, they still want to be a Commodore, stay at a Virginia Union High School, but they want to take part maybe in an elective that they offer over at the other high school, just to kind of try to expand course offerings for students in any way that we can, and so that's something we're starting next year. Students are right now doing their course signups for next year, so we don't know yet how many kids will want to take advantage of this, but we're doing everything that we can to try to provide access to students.
Seems
wherever.
There's more and more collaboration between Mount Abe and Virgins high schools.
Yes, and we also have, a shared collaborative for special education services, because we may have 1 or 2 students that fit a particular profile. They may have similar numbers, and so together, we can build a program for 6 or 8 students that fit a particular program more cost effectively than we can each trying to do it on our own.
So long term, where do you see us? Where should we go long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of there being the sustainability of what we're doing right now. And I don't mean just for Virgins, I mean as a state. I think we've reached a point where there's widespread acknowledgement that we can't continue in this way. It's unaffordable, it's not sustainable. And I think we need to figure out both what we want for students, what is that vision for high quality educational experience for our students, and how many school buildings, how can we afford, what can we afford, and how many buildings can we afford in order to be able to provide that high quality education for all students. And I think sustaining really small high schools into the future is probably not going to be one of the available options. I think to get to that quality and to get to that breadth and depth of what we're looking for high school students, we're probably going to have to reduce the number of high schools that we have.
Some way or another, have fewer high schools and collect students in greater numbers.
I think so. And
Yeah.
we, again, we have some of that already. We do have high school choice. We do have this new program I'm describing. Students have the option through Act 77 to access flexible pathways to their learning. So there's about as much creativity as we can, but we're still trying to operate all those schools, and that's very costly for Vermont taxpayers. So, like we had to do for sustaining technical education, we had to make some agreements about how many tech centers we could really afford to have and where those should be located. Similarly, I think we need to figure out what a really robust high school experience looks like and where we want to operate those high schools in geographic areas that make sense.
As a past tech center teacher, I taught auto technology for a number of years. It seems to me that we need to have a lot more robust career and technical education system or program accessibility for students. Try to get an electrician or a plumber, look at the number of construction jobs that are going wanting right now. And we're not preparing students for those jobs.
I agree. Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think there's been kind of a resurgence of interest in that for those reasons. I think that we need to continue to try to really offer a wide range of secondary experiences for students, and those being some.
How do we do that?
How do we
get more students at the tech center?
I think pre-technical education is really important, and that's a little bit cost prohibitive as well. I think right now we have those offerings for juniors and seniors and a handful of sophomores, but we don't really see as much at the middle level or in the earlier years of high school. It's kind of inaccessible to students, and once you're on a pathway in high school, it's harder to maybe imagine getting there, or we have students who can't wait to get there. They can't get there fast enough, right? But I think that it's so much more than college or career, really. I think the research shows that these types of skills are really necessary for many careers, and that all students should be exposed to this type of learning.
I couldn't agree more.
And so I think there's a lot more we could be doing even at the elementary and middle school. When I was the director of curriculum in the Harwood Unified Union District, one of the programs we brought in was called Project Lead the Way, which I don't like that name, but it's a program that begins in kindergarten. That's technical education, basically. It's a lot of coding and design and real hands-on, very engaging and exciting learning that students can do right up through the grades. And in a full-on Project Lead the Way system, by the time you get to high school, you can choose a pathway, health sciences, computer sciences, and concentrate in that area and graduate and start at a much higher level at college even. So it augments what CTEs are doing, I think.
So that's a really good point. If you watch an infant or a toddler, they learn with their hands and feet as much as they learn with in fact, probably more than they learn with their brain. They're soaking up everything every second they're alive.
Yeah.
And then somehow we transition to this, okay, no more learning with their hands. We're out of kindergarten now. You have to start book learning, and we leave behind all of those manual skills. And that's a really hadn't thought of it that way before. That's an interesting concept.
Yeah, it's very interesting to watch, kindergarten, first, second grade students learning to use iPads to operate robotic equipment and watch that sort of, wow, look
Yeah.
at what I can do.
Yeah.
And technology is so powerful, and it's interesting to kind of put that into their hands and watch what they can do. So through Project Lead the Way, they really learn to solve problems using these tools, which is just, again, very engaging.
One of you also mentioned hurdles. The budget process for having students go to the tech center is really problematic. You have to, you meaning superintendents and school boards, have to build into their budgets at whatever it is, $20,000 per kid.
Yeah.
So if you have $200,000, that means what, 10 kids can go to the tech center.
Yeah.
And if more go, because each student in our law, each student has a right to technical education should they choose it. So if you have 15 students go to the tech center, now you've blown your budget wide open.
Yeah.
And that's a real problem. If we had a situation where there wasn't that, the same budget was built for academic high school as it was for technical high school, which leads me to think that the real future I'd like to see for Addison County is a comprehensive, what I call a comprehensive high school, a high school that has both academic courses and tech courses, and the barrier is not, the financial barrier anyway, is non-existent. That because the budget is one budget for the entire high school class, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a good vision. I think that is something I've heard discussed more frequently in superintendent circles, just this idea of comprehensive high schools and what that would look like. It's interesting for us in Addison County being part of the Champlain Valley Superintendents Association, because we are lumped in with all of the Chittenden County superintendents who already have really large high schools. And they're in most ways operating already at scale. And so they don't necessarily relate to my struggles here. Right? But also we have, Franklin County, and we have Venusburg, and all of those schools up there, and they can much more relate, I think, to what we're going through down here. So it's just kind of an interesting grouping that really, I think, for it to have weighed so heavily in the governor's plan doesn't make a lot of sense, because those lines were not drawn for any good reason. They just represent an area for us to get together and meet frequently. They're not really by design in any other way.
What struck me, one of the things that struck me about the plan that came out from the governor's office is that they used 3 consultants, as I understand it, 3 consultants to pick and choose from those consultants how they would put together this plan. And I think all 3 of them saw a number that was the optimum high school size. And or school district, excuse me, the optimum school district size. And it was right around 4,000 students. And his smallest district is more than twice that. It doesn't make sense to me if the optimum size for cost efficiency and ability to deliver programs and do an excellent job for our students is around 4,000 per district, why we're even contemplating something as massive as 35,000, which would be the district Addison County.
Yeah, I don't understand it either. From that perspective, I agree with you. The 4,000, maybe a little larger if it needed to be, but that seems to be the right about scale size that in everything I've seen. So that makes sense to me as well.
So you have a much broader scope of vision besides just Addison Northwest being the part of the Superintendents Association, your life in Randolph and your work in Harwood. What notion do you see might benefit our students if it were to play out statewide?
Well, I think the benefit directly for students that attend Virgins would be just a wider range of opportunity. than they have now. Again, our school does an excellent job. Our students are happy and doing very well, but there's a lot they don't have access to. So in some ways, I think we don't know what we don't know about what it would be like to be part of a larger system and what that might look like on the day-to-day for our students.
So if we had a single comprehensive high school for Addison County, that might offer students the variety of programming that would be best suited for our students.
More choice, yeah. More like, even pathways within the school that they could, have interest in and pursue.
And what would that mean for other counties?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, Chittenden County already has much more, opportunity. But I think when I think about Harwood, the district I came from, and I think about its geographic location as compared to, Chittenden County, Harwood's kind of isolated. You've got students all the way from, Warren to the Stowe town line, and that's like 40 miles or something, right? And all of those kids are going to a single high school in Duxbury. It's not really close to anything else. So in a broader scale, if we were making a decision, if you and I got to decide, like, where are all these comprehensive high schools?
That's the way it should work. We'll sit down and figure it out.
Going to be located. I'm sure there would be places in the state where we're like, well, this just isn't close to anything else. There happens to be a mountain in between, this district and that district, and that's kind of inconvenient. So, there would probably be some exceptions to where we would have to make different decisions. But I think for the most part, we should be thinking and making decisions first in terms of the vision for student education. What do we want for our students? What do we want all Vermont high school students, all Vermont students to have access to? And then how are we going to provide that? How are we going to scale that? And where would we then locate these centers for learning so that everybody has access?
Yeah.
We need to make decisions based on all students in Vermont, not just the ones we know best and who live nearby us, right? But really all students.
So maybe what the legislature should be doing is creating a study committee that designs one answer for Addison County and maybe a different answer for Chittenden and a different answer for Bennington County.
That could be true. Yeah. I mean, part of what I'm hearing coming out of House Ed is indirectly related to that idea. I'm sort of hearing this notion of, I don't know, they called it base closures, but like they're thinking about it from like, wouldn't there be buildings that would have to close? And they're thinking about which buildings might those be, maybe to flip that, to upend that and say, what do we want to create? And let's figure that out. And then what does that leave behind? And maybe that's part of the solution.
That, I think you've made such an incredible distinction that I think is so missing in some conversations. And that is, do we start with what's best for students and what's best for communities and then try to build towards that? Or do we decide, like, where can we save money and what are we going to close? That's a whole different perspective that is not really addressing the students. And isn't that what we're about as educators, is delivering what's best for students?
Yes, yeah. We've talked a lot about high school. We haven't really talked about elementary school. And I do think there's been a lot of effort to bolstering the community, the notion of community schools located that are very, comprehensive elementary schools, or even comprehensive K-8 schools located in town centers, right, where students can thrive. I think there has to be, if you're asking me, I think there has to be a right-sized component to that as well. That's also good for kids in many ways, and I know that's not always a popular idea, but in my district, I would say that our elementary schools are right-sized, and they have, in many ways, distinguished themselves as community schools. Virgin's Elementary School has had a community school grant for many years. They've tried to think about things like food insecurity and having a community garden and launching and leveraging some health services in schools and ways to connect parents to the school community. And I think that's another way that we can invest, right? That really supports students at the very youngest age and supports families in supporting students.
Yeah, interesting. To my great distress, as one of the committee members that created Act 46 that was designed to protect elementary schools, each of the school districts in Addison County closed or attempted to close elementary school. So, and we have three very distinct cases. So Addison School was closed, and there's still hard feelings about that. Lincoln, under the threat of closure, went rogue and created their own school district and do vouchers for high school. And then Ripton left and then got forced back in by the State Board of Education. So there's got to be, a dozen or 24 communities just like those communities.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that going forward?
Yeah, that's a really tough part, but I think it's very similar to the conversation that we just had about high school students. We really need to think about what are we trying to create? What's really good for kids? And I know my opinion, having worked in a very small elementary school at one point, that there's a synergy and something to be gained in a larger setting that you often can't replicate in a very small setting. We had single grades when I was at Facein. Sometimes the grade group was 8 students. Sometimes it might be as many as 14, but usually on the smaller side. And those students they're together year after year in that grade. They don't have any opportunity for new friendships. There are some missing pieces in that. And when they become part of a larger learning environment, there are often opportunities for them to stretch and grow in new ways that they don't get when they're in that single setting in the smaller school. And we sometimes don't have as many resources, right, in a smaller school than we do in a larger school, or access to, a librarian being in school every day of the week, a nurse being in school every day of the week. A lot of those folks end up being part-time and they're not there. When I see, for example, at Virgins, our full-time PE teacher is able to do so many amazing things. Robin Newton was Vermont's Teacher of the Year last year. And she's, building programs 5 days of the week. And she's not just, there like 1 or 2 days, like in some of the smaller schools. That's all you get. You're, fly in and fly out PE teacher or art teacher.
There's another side to that coin, though, that I feel obligated to bring up. And that is I play pool. I'm a pool player. And we have a group of guys that play at each other's houses. So one of the guys that we go there and play, and he's got a big wall, pictures of his childhood and his vacations and his family and all that stuff. It's wonderful to look at this wall. And he pointed out to me a picture of elementary school students. He said, I can name every one of those students.
Yeah.
He said, I went through 8th grade, 8 grades with those students in a small elementary school. Of course, there were 15 or 20 in his class. So it wasn't 8 in a class. Yeah. So but he was very proud of the fact that these are lifelong friends. Sure. It was a Vermont elementary school just down the road. And he was proud of the fact that these are lifelong friendships that were made.
Yeah.
So there's value to these small community schools.
There's value. I think this one's hard, right? There's value. It's undoubtedly. But when you add in the affordability factor too, then we have to start thinking about that a little bit differently. So I don't have a solution for that one. I think there's no way out except through, and we're going to have to figure that out.
To my mind, the most difficult is the middle school. I think, elementary school, lower grade, primary grades, you can do a lot with a little you don't need AP Calc.
Yes.
Starting in middle school, though, I think you need to have a broader program offerings, and kids are little adults, or that to my mind, that's the biggest challenge going forward is what do we do with our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders as we try to design the best educational outcomes for those kids.
And again, it's something that there's a lot of research and evidence out there about what makes a good middle school. Adolescents are going through unbelievable growth during that time, and making some pretty strong decisions about their, some pretty important decisions about their lives in that chunk of time and who they are, and so there's a lot of research and evidence about what a good middle school model looks like. And it's expensive to pull that off in a small setting. For example, we are right on the cusp right now. We have a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, teaming structure that works pretty well. But if we had fewer students, we'd probably have to start thinking about grouping those kids differently in ways that aren't as much in alignment with what the research says about what's best for kids. So having a team, for example, is something we know is really important in middle school. So we have 2 teams right now in our middle school. You're in this house or you're in that house. If we got much smaller, we wouldn't have that structure anymore. We'd lose that. And
interesting. Well, thank you so much for coming today. You shed some light on some important aspects of education and where we are now and where we want to be.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's great. And we'll have to see how things go forward in the